What if the greatest battles you'll ever fight have nothing to do with swords, soldiers, or bloodshed, but everything to do with the mind, with influence, with control? There are 33 strategies of war, timeless, ruthless, and shockingly relevant, that have shaped emperors, outlasted revolutions, and silently govern the modern world. From manipulating perception to engineering chaos, from feigning madness to orchestrating surrender, these aren't just rules of war, they are blueprints for dominance. In this video, we journey through each one, through the cold brilliance of Nickel, Machiavelli, and the modern clarity of Robert Greene, unpacking how these strategies work, where they've been used in history, and how they're still shaping the battles we fight today, in boardrooms, relationships, politics, and power. Strategy 1 will force you to define yourself through opposition. Strategy 33 will show you how to weave all strategies into one unstoppable arsenal, and everything in between. It just might change the way you move through the world forever. Clarity emerges when you know not only what you fight for, but also what you stand against. Power is never born from neutrality, it is forged in contrast. By defining your enemies, you shape your identity, your purpose, and your narrative. People rally not simply around causes, but around clearly defined oppositions. Without a perceived enemy, even noble intentions dissolve into ambiguity. Polarity is a tool. It simplifies complexity, mobilizes loyalty, and sharpens focus. Machiavelli emphasized this necessity in The Prince, noting that a prince must learn how not to be good, and to use this knowledge, or not to use it according to necessity. To wield that knowledge effectively, the prince must first draw clear boundaries. Moral lines are not always followed, but they are always displayed. Enemies offer a mirror, a reflection of what you claim not to be, and through them, you reinforce what you are. In a world driven by perception, what you oppose becomes as powerful a statement as what you support. History offers no greater example than Julius Caesar. When Caesar crossed the Rubicon, it wasn't merely a military move. It was an ideological one. He cast the Roman Senate as corrupt, elitist, and out of touch. By defining the Senate as his opposition, he gave shape to his identity as the voice of the common Roman. The polarity he created didn't just justify his rebellion, it sanctified it. His opposition gave him a cause, and that cause gave him power. This mirrors Robert Greene's Law 10 in the 48 Laws of Power. Infection. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky. Just as aligning with weakness pollutes your power, failing to define what weakens you leaves your power undefined. The first step in warfare, both in the world and within yourself, is to draw your battle lines with precision. And once that inner clarity is established, the war of the mind begins. Before any sword is drawn, before any words are spoken, there is a silent war waged within. A guerrilla war of thought, adaptability, and mental resistance. Before any empire falls in battle, it first collapses in the mind. Rigidity is the death of progress, and in war, internal or external, flexibility is survival. The most dangerous adversary is not the one with overwhelming force, but the one who shifts shape, adapts, and evolves faster than the enemy can track. The battlefield of the mind is not governed by rules. It is a shifting terrain where fixed beliefs become traps and certainty becomes a prison. Machiavelli, who prized adaptability above all, warned that fortune is like a woman. It favors the bold, but it also favors the flexible. In The Prince, he observes, "It is better to be impetuous than cautious, for fortune is a woman, and it is necessary, if you wish to master her, to conquer her by force." But force here is not just physical aggression. It is the mental agility to change course, adopt new methods, and discard obsolete ideas without hesitation. History gives us the figure of T.E. Lawrence, better known as Lawrence of Arabia. Fighting with Bedouin tribes against the Ottoman Empire during World War I, Lawrence never relied on conventional warfare. He struck unexpectedly, moved quickly, vanished into the desert, and reappeared when least expected. His power came not from superior numbers, but from mental agility and unorthodox tactics. He fought not on the battlefield, but in the minds of his enemies. This echoes Robert Greene's Law 480. Assume formlessness. To hold power in an unpredictable world, one must flow like water, never holding a single shape for too long. The moment your mind hardens into certainty, your defeat begins. Guerrilla warfare in thought means questioning your assumptions daily, turning the familiar upside down, and embracing discomfort as a signal for transformation. When your thinking becomes a moving target, your enemies cannot pin you down. This mental mobility becomes your shield, your sword, and your strategy. And it prepares you for the next level, when retreat is no longer an option, and your only path is through. That is where you learn the power of the death ground. There are moments when escape is a curse and pressure is a gift. The death ground is not a place. It is a psychological state where your only option is to fight or perish. History has shown that humans become most inventive, most ferocious, and most alive when backed into a corner. When the bridge behind you is burned, you no longer waste time hesitating. You act with the full force of your being. This strategy is about engineering that urgency, not waiting for it. Machiavelli grasped this deeply. In The Art of War, he wrote, "Men will always do more to avoid a great evil than to obtain a great good." When soldiers are placed in a position where flight is impossible, they become possessed with a desperate courage. That desperation for survival becomes a tool in the hands of the wise commander. He creates a death ground, psychological or real, not to punish, but to awaken the sleeping strength in his troops. A perfect example comes from the legendary Chinese general Sun Tzu, whose writings influenced Machiavelli himself. In one campaign, Sun Tzu positioned his army with a river at their backs, cutting off retreat. His men, faced with death, fought with such intensity that they defeated a much larger force. The impossibility of retreat transformed them from soldiers into warriors. This strategy aligns with Robert Greene's Law 2090. Plan all the way to the end. But to plan all the way to the end often means eliminating your ability to turn back. The death ground is the final scene of your plan, where all alternatives are stripped away. It is not chaos. It is calculated pressure. By placing yourself in situations where success is your only option, you eliminate distractions, excuses, and fear. It is here that leaders are forged. not by comfort, but by consequence. And once you emerge from the death ground alive, the question is no longer whether you will fight, but what you will fight for. That requires a vision, a map, and a strategy larger than any single battle. It requires a grand strategy. Victory is sweet, but power that endures is strategic. Most people chase battles. They want to win now, dominate now, prove something now. But war, true war, is not a sprint. It is a map drawn in decades. A single triumph can intoxicate the unwise, leading them to overreach, lose sight of the larger aim, and collapse in the glow of a temporary flame. The grand strategy teaches patience. It demands that every move serve a greater design. Machiavelli wrote, "It is much safer to be feared than loved, when one of the two must be lacking. But fear, love, or control, these must be sustained. Without long-term thinking, fear fades, love evaporates, and power slips like water through the hands." In The Prince, he repeatedly urges rulers to look not at today, but at what today shapes for tomorrow. The wise leader views every decision as part of a continuum, not a moment. A case in point is Otto von Bismarck, the Iron Chancellor of Germany. He understood that unification would not happen through a single war or alliance. It needed a web of diplomacy, manipulation, and carefully orchestrated conflicts. His victories were not just military. They were strategic layers woven to engineer a lasting empire. He baited France into war, isolated Austria, and united the German states, all without ever losing sight of his long-term vision. This reflects Robert Greene's Law 29 again. Plan all the way to the end. But with greater scale, you must think not just how to win, but how to win in a way that solidifies your power, shapes the narrative, and makes the next battle easier or unnecessary. Short-term victories are like borrowed power. They feel exhilarating, but leave you exposed. A grand strategy, on the other hand, makes you inevitable. And to hold such a strategy in place, you must first master the most volatile battlefield of all: your own emotions. That is where the counterbalance begins. A leader who cannot master their own emotions will never command the loyalty of others. In war, emotion is both a weapon and a weakness. Passion can drive you forward, but it can also blind you. Anger might energize, but it clouds judgment. Fear can protect you, or paralyze you. The counterbalance strategy teaches that inner equilibrium is not softness, it is strength in its purest form. True power lies not in suppressing emotion but in regulating it, channeling it like a seasoned general directing firepower. Machiavelli understood this intimately. He wrote in the Discourses, "He who lets himself be ruled by his feelings loses his judgment." A prince, he argued, must be like both the lion and the fox, strong but shrewd, capable of fury but ruled by foresight. The lion that roars without thinking becomes a target. The wise prince learns to appear passionate, while remaining cold in calculation. Consider Abraham Lincoln during the U.S. Civil War. Known for his calm demeanor, Lincoln faced betrayal, national collapse, and personal attacks. But he cultivated an internal stillness that allowed him to lead through the chaos. He vented his rage privately, writing furious letters he never sent, then addressed his cabinet with measured resolve. His self-control became a stabilizing force for a fractured nation. This resonates with Robert Greene's Law 33G. Discover each man's thumbscrew. Before you exploit others' weaknesses, understand and disarm your own. Your emotional center must be fortified, not exposed. If others can predict how you will react, they can control you. But if you remain emotionally poised, expressing fire only when it serves a purpose, you become dangerous in the most precise, Machiavellian way. Internal control is command. Emotional mastery is strategy. And once you control the self, you're ready to lead with authority, not hesitation. For nothing undermines power more swiftly than indecision in the heat of war. It is time now to seize the reins of control. Command and conquer. Power must be seen. Leadership must be felt. In the chaos of conflict, people do not follow the most intelligent. They follow the most certain. Indecision is a poison in warfare, and those who hesitate are often destroyed by those who act. The command and control strategy is not about barking orders. It is about radiating authority so profoundly that others instinctively defer to your judgment. You must seize control of your direction, your team, and your narrative, or someone else will. Machiavelli was explicit about this. In The Prince, he warns, a prince must not waver, he must be able to act decisively and with force. Rulers who hesitate invite rebellion, manipulation, or worse, irrelevance. In a world where fortune shifts rapidly, the ability to decide and command gives the illusion of mastery over uncertainty. People trust the leader who seems sure, even when outcomes are unclear. Consider Napoleon Bonaparte. His genius wasn't just strategic. It was psychological. On the battlefield, he projected calm, confidence, and absolute control. Even in the most desperate circumstances, his officers, and even his enemies, often mistook this certainty for invincibility. Napoleon knew that a hesitant general breeds panic, a resolute one builds momentum. This principle ties directly to Robert Greene's Law 307G. Create compelling spectacles. The image of command is important as the command itself. Even when uncertain, act with conviction. When others see your confidence, they begin to doubt their own. Command is not about knowing all answers. It's about committing to a direction and making it work. Inaction is a decision, too, and usually the worst one. Once you are in control, you can begin shaping the terrain, bending chaos to your will. And if war teaches one truth, it is this: chaos is not to be feared, but to be wielded. Your next move is to master the storm, not escape it. Most fear chaos. They see it as the collapse of structure, the end of reason, the breeding ground of panic. But for the strategic mind, chaos is not the enemy. It is a condition to be mastered. In disorder, patterns are broken, habits disrupted, and expectations shattered. The one who can remain composed amid turmoil, or better yet, direct it, becomes the eye of the storm, the calm, commanding center while others spin out of control. Machiavelli saw opportunity in disorder. In the Discourses he wrote, "Tumult is not always to be avoided. Great men often arise from it." Chaos to him was a crucible that revealed the worthy and exposed the weak. More importantly, it could be engineered to destabilize opponents, to shift power subtly, and to disorient adversaries before the fatal blow. A leader who thrives in chaos is ungovernable, because they turn unpredictability into a weapon. Look to Winston Churchill during the Blitz. As bombs rained on London, fear was thick in the air. But Churchill projected unshakable resolve. He walked through rubble with a cigar in hand, spoke to citizens as if victory was guaranteed, and made order seem possible even as everything fell apart. His control of perception amid real chaos became a strategy that helped preserve British morale and power. This reflects Robert Greene's Law 39Z. Stir up waters to catch fish. Creating confusion while remaining centered allows you to control the game unseen. Others react while you orchestrate. Chaos, in this sense, is camouflage and opportunity combined. The world is unpredictable by nature. Trying to impose rigid control is a fragile illusion. Instead, embed your strategy within the disorder. Let chaos hide your intent, amplify your power, and exhaust your enemies. And once you've made the storm your domain, you're no longer reacting to events. You're directing them. From here, war leaves the self and enters the realm of the collective. Now that you command your own chaos, it's time to inspire order and fire in others. The morale strategy awaits. An army is not a machine, it is a spirit. Weapons, numbers, and strategies mean little if the hearts behind them falter. Morale is invisible, yet it decides wars. It is the internal flame that drives men to endure pain, resist fear, and fight for something beyond survival. A leader who can lift spirits, even in despair, becomes more powerful than one who merely gives orders. To inspire is to command without force. Machiavelli emphasized that love and fear are tools, but morale is what binds them. In The Prince, he wrote, "It is necessary for a prince to learn how to uplift men and maintain their allegiance through courage and honor. Loyalty built through respect and shared purpose creates a force far more durable than one held only by coercion. A prince who earns loyalty through belief ensures endurance through adversity. History confirms this with Alexander the Great. After months of brutal campaigning, his soldiers neared revolt. Instead of punishing them, Alexander stripped off his own armor and displayed the same scars they bore, sunburned, wounded, and exhausted. In that moment, he was no longer a king, he was one of them. Their morale reignited, and they followed him to the ends of the earth. This echoes Robert Greene's Law 275. Play on people's need to believe to create a cult, like following. Belief, not brute strength, is what welds people together. When individuals feel part of a cause greater than themselves, they sacrifice willingly. That belief must be cultivated constantly, with symbols, rituals, rewards, and purpose. You do not push people toward greatness, you awaken it within them. Speak to their sense of duty, their pride, their need for meaning. When morale is high, even small forces perform miracles. And when morale is shattered, even giants fall. But even the most inspired army must be prepared to respond, not merely act. Sometimes to win, you must wait, then counter with precision. The art of the counterattack is next. In war, the first blow is often a trap. When your opponent acts in haste, driven by emotion or overconfidence, they expose their weaknesses. The counterattack strategy is the art of strategic patience, absorbing the strike, measuring the damage, then responding with precise and overwhelming force. It is not passive. It is timing in its most lethal form. You wait not out of fear, but to let your enemy unravel themselves. Machiavelli knew that striking second, when done right, is not weakness. It's calculation. In The Prince, he advises, "It is a common fault not to anticipate the coming storm when the weather is fair. But once that storm hits, the wise prince does not panic. He reads the winds, studies the chaos, and moves only when his enemy's position is exposed. Let them show their hand first, then act decisively and without mercy." A historical master of the counterattack was General Ulysses S. Grant during the American Civil War. At Shiloh, his forces were ambushed and overwhelmed early in battle. Many generals would have retreated. Grant held firm, reorganized overnight, and launched a brutal counteroffensive at dawn. His comeback was not just a military rebound. It crushed Confederate morale and established his reputation as a relentless commander. This aligns with Robert Greene's law with Finfi: crush your enemy totally. But before you crush, you must understand. The counterattack strategy gives you that understanding. You let others rush ahead, burn their energy, reveal their strategies, and then you hit when they cannot defend. It is the strategy of the seasoned predator. Let your opponent believe they are in control. Let them overextend. And when they are most exposed, strike. But sometimes, even a counterattack is too much. There are battles not worth fighting, enemies not worth confronting. The strongest move isn't always attack. Sometimes, it's silence. The next strategy will teach you when not to engage at all. Not every insult requires a response. Not every enemy deserves your attention. Power is not always shown in confrontation. Often, it is demonstrated through restraint. The non-engagement strategy is about discernment, choosing when not to fight. It teaches that distraction is more dangerous than defeat, and that fighting every battle weakens your focus, depletes your energy, and obscures your larger aim. Machiavelli warned against overreaching ambition. In The Prince, he notes, "There is nothing more difficult to take in hand, more perilous to conduct, or more uncertain in its success, than to take the lead in the introduction of a new order of things. To do so, a prince must preserve his strength and clarity of purpose. Engaging in unnecessary skirmishes, whether to prove pride or respond to provocation, endangers the greater campaign. The wise ruler ignores that which does not serve his ascent." Queen Elizabeth I of England understood this profoundly. Surrounded by powerful enemies, religious conflict, and political traps, she became a master of calculated inaction. She delayed decisions, avoided direct confrontations, and refused to be baited into wars that could drain her kingdom. Her refusal to react on others' terms allowed her to preserve her authority and navigate treacherous waters for over 4 decades. This is mirrored in Robert Greene's Law 2020G. Use the surrender tactic. Transform weakness into power. By appearing passive, you gain time. Observe more, and often provoke your adversary into revealing their own desperation. Silence and absence can be weapons when used with purpose. To not fight is sometimes the most strategic move of all. It allows you to conserve strength for battles that matter, those that shift the balance of power. When you step back, you are not retreating. You are choosing where the next chain of events will begin. Because when the time is right, you won't merely react. You will ignite a chain reaction that changes everything. Power is rarely taken in one stroke. It is accumulated, triggered, and expanded through a series of calculated moves, each one reinforcing the next. The chain reaction strategy is about creating momentum that carries you forward beyond your initial effort. You act once, strategically, and that act sets off a sequence. Like dominoes falling, not by force, but by design. True mastery lies in engineering inevitability. Machiavelli understood the ripple effect of power. In the Discourses, he wrote, "It is easy to begin a war, but not so easy to stop one." He didn't mean to discourage action. He meant that once a force is unleashed, it grows and spreads. The wise prince uses this to his advantage, setting events in motion that multiply power without the need for constant intervention. One move plants fear, another seizes territory, a third earns loyalty, and together they form an unstoppable flow. Julius Caesar again offers the perfect example. His crossing of the Rubicon was not just a military act. It was the spark that ignited a civil war, transformed the Roman Republic, and elevated him to imperial status. That single, irreversible decision created a chain of reactions. Political shifts, defections, battles, alliances that he had already anticipated. He did not need to force every outcome. He had positioned himself to benefit from the inevitable flow once the first stone was cast. This reflects Robert Greene's Law 23. Concentrate your forces. But it adds depth. By not just concentrating, but aligning your forces in sequence, each supporting and amplifying the next, momentum becomes a force multiplier. Rather than fighting every battle, create conditions where victory builds on victory. Let your influence expand through structure and timing. And as momentum grows, strike suddenly and decisively. Because speed, surprise, is the fuel of chain reactions. And that brings us to the next weapon of warfare, the Blitzkrieg. Speed is a form of power. In war, hesitation is an open door. Speed slams it shut before your enemy can even react. The Blitzkrieg strategy is built on rapid, concentrated attacks that overwhelm before resistance can be organized. It's not just about movement. It's about momentum that paralyzes. When you act swiftly and with force, you seize the initiative and destabilize everything. Your opponent depends on their timing, their confidence, their plans. Machiavelli praised swift, bold action. In The Prince, he warned, "It is better to act and repent than not to act and regret." He admired Cesare Borgia for his speed in eliminating rivals and securing power before opposition could form. Machiavelli saw that fortune favors those who move fast when the window opens. Delay for him was the alley of ruin. Modern history offers a vivid illustration: Hitler's Blitzkrieg in World War II. Though morally abhorrent, the tactic itself was brutally effective. By combining fast, moving armored divisions, air power, and psychological warfare, the Germans overwhelmed Poland and France with staggering speed. The enemy didn't fall in drawn-out battles. They collapsed in confusion. The attack was not just physical. It broke their will before they had time to respond. This mirrors Robert Greene's Law 15. Crush your enemy totally. And Law 209. Plan all the way to the end. Blitzkrieg is both a total, premeditated domination through speed. You don't just win the battle, you destroy your enemy's ability to respond. Shock disrupts. Surprise disorients. And speed makes both fatal. But even a fast strike must be calculated. You must know where to hit for maximum collapse. And often, that means not the whole, but the unity. The next strategy shows how to dismantle the enemy before battle even begins. By dividing them from within. Divide and conquer. Power consolidates in unity. Destroy that unity, and power collapses without a fight. The divide and conquer strategy is as ancient as war itself, yet still one of the most devastating. You don't face the entire enemy head-on. You splinter them. You exploit rivalries, plant doubts, encourage mistrust, and create factions. Once divided, your opponents turn on each other, weakening themselves while you remain untouched. You let internal conflict do the work of open war. Machiavelli made this principle central to his vision of ruling. In the Discourses, he advises, "A prince who has newly acquired a state must do all he can to divide it." He admired the Romans for always cultivating divisions in the territories they conquered, ensuring those they ruled would never unite in rebellion. Machiavelli believed that true control was not in domination, but in distraction. A classic historical example is the British Empire's strategy in colonial India. Rather than defeating a united population, the British deepened divisions between Hindus and Muslims, between castes and classes. They positioned themselves as mediators in conflicts they often stirred themselves. The result was control with fewer soldiers, rule sustained not by force, but by fragmentation. This echoes Robert Greene's Law 28. Do not commit to anyone. In warfare, this extends to others as well. Keep your enemies from committing to each other. Sow suspicion subtly. Favor one side, then the other. Encourage minor disputes and disagreements until they grow into rifts. When unity fractures, even strong coalitions implode. When your enemies fight among themselves, you become invisible and invincible. You become the architect of a collapse they believe was their own making. But sometimes, even division is too loud a move. The next level of warfare is silence, subversion, and soft strikes. Enter the world of passive aggression. There is a form of warfare where no banners are raised, no battles declared, and yet destruction unfolds steadily, invisibly. Passive aggression is the art of quiet domination, of smiling while you sabotage, of agreeing while you obstruct. It allows you to weaken your enemy's foundations without provoking their defenses. In this strategy, your power lies in patience, ambiguity, and plausible deniability. You never appear hostile, but your influence erodes their strength day by day. Machiavelli admired this silent form of warfare. In The Prince, he wrote, "Men should either be treated generously or destroyed, because they take revenge for slight injuries. For heavy ones they cannot." Passive aggression lives in that space, never crossing into open injury, but constantly frustrating, misleading, and misdirecting. The enemy feels the pain, but can't point to the source. This is the domain of the fox, not the lion. Take the example of Cardinal Richelieu, the architect of French absolutism. he rarely acted through direct confrontation. Instead, he infiltrated opposition councils, fed misleading intelligence, delayed decisions, and let rivals weaken each other through suspicion. To his enemies, he was distant and benign. In reality, he orchestrated their downfall through unseen wires. This reflects Robert Greene's Law 30. Conceal your intentions. And Law 36C. Disdain things you cannot have. Ignoring them is the best revenge. Passive aggression weaponizes silence, restraint, and selective attention. It's not weakness. It's psychological warfare disguised as detachment. By refusing to react, you force your enemies to become louder, more obvious, and more exposed. Their frustration grows, and they begin to sabotage themselves. You, meanwhile, remain calm, appearing above the fray. But even subtle control requires structure. To maintain it long-term, you must ensure the chain of command bends only to you. And that is where we go next. To the strategic spine of all power, the hierarchy. Power without structure is unstable. Even the most charismatic leader will fall if their authority lacks a clear hierarchy to support and execute it. The chain of command strategy is about establishing a system where every link serves your objectives, where control moves downward efficiently, and where loyalty is enforced by position, not just personality. A strong hierarchy insulates you from chaos and ensures your vision is carried out, even when you're not present. Machiavelli stressed the importance of organizational order. In The Prince, he warned, "A prince must build on sound foundations. The two foundations are good laws and good arms. But those arms are not just military, they're structural. A prince must ensure that every official, commander, and subordinate knows their place, understands their duties, and fears disorder more than they resent obedience. This clarity breeds loyalty and eliminates the most dangerous threat to any ruler's internal collapse." Consider the example of Frederick the Great of Prussia. His military dominance was not simply due to superior tactics, but because he created one of the most efficient hierarchical structures in European history. Orders flowed clearly from the top, discipline was absolute, and everyone understood their role. Even in his absence, his system ran with the precision of a machine. This gave Prussia strength beyond its size. Robert Greene's Law 1, never outshine the master, operates best within a controlled hierarchy. When the chain of command is firm, subordinates remain in their lanes, power is centralized, and insubordination is quietly isolated. A chaotic structure, on the other hand, invites rebellion and dilutes authority. You cannot enforce discipline without a system. You cannot execute strategy without command. And in times of siege or uncertainty, your hierarchy becomes your shield. But even with such structure, defense must be active, not static. When threats arise, knowing how and when to resist becomes essential. And so, we shift now from internal control to the outer walls. Defensive warfare begins. Before conquest comes consolidation. In war, as in life, rushing forward without securing your base is suicide. The defensive war strategy teaches that the surest offense is often rooted in a fortified defense. Before you expand, you must protect. Before you attack, you must anticipate. And sometimes, holding your ground while the storm passes is more powerful than charging into it. True defense is not retreat, it is preparation. Machiavelli placed immense value on fortification. In The Prince, he wrote, "A wise prince will strengthen his state with all diligence, and will never be idle in times of peace." He admired cities that built strong walls, literal and figurative, and rulers who strengthened alliances, internal structures, and public support before initiating conflict. For Machiavelli, a prince who begins with defense ensures he can endure the unexpected. One striking example comes from Tokugawa Ieyasu, the shogun who unified Japan in the early 17th century. Before asserting dominance, Tokugawa spent years solidifying his territories, building alliances through marriage and diplomacy, and reinforcing his armies. He allowed others to wage flashy wars, while he quietly prepared. When he finally made his move at the Battle of Sekigahara, his position was so secure that victory was not just possible, it was inevitable. This echoes Robert Greene's Law 18. Do not build fortresses to protect yourself. Isolation is dangerous, but with nuance. Greene warns against emotional or political isolation, not against fortification. Defensive strategy is about intelligent consolidation, not hiding but stabilizing. Strengthen your base, not to withdraw, but to launch stronger. Defense is not weakness, it is restraint with intent. It is strategy waiting for the perfect moment. And that moment often belongs to those who hold something back, who keep their full strength hidden, like a weapon sheathed in shadow. The next strategy sharpens that lesson: conceal your power until the time to strike. To reveal everything is to give away power. The greatest warriors and strategists understand the art of concealment, not just to mislead, but to control the rhythm of engagement. The hidden weapon strategy is about masking your capabilities until they become unavoidable, unleashing your full strength only when it is too late for your enemy to respond. What remains unseen holds more fear than what is exposed. Machiavelli advised rulers to master this form of deception. In The Prince, he declared, "A wise ruler ought never to keep faith when doing so would be against his interests." He meant that a ruler must never show his hand completely. Concealing one's true intentions, resources, and strengths allows space for flexibility and surprise. Machiavelli saw concealment not as dishonesty, but as a political necessity in a world driven by ambition and betrayal. Consider the example of Deng Xiaoping, the architect of modern China's economic rise. For years, Deng operated under the principle of hide your strength, bide your time. China kept its ambitions modest on the surface, avoiding direct confrontation while quietly building economic and military power. When the time came, the transformation was so sudden and sweeping that the world struggled to adjust. It wasn't magic. It was the strategic release of concealed strength. This connects to Robert Greene's Law 30, conceal your intentions, and Law 60, court attention at all costs, but only when the time is right. The brilliance lies in contrast. Your silence before the storm, your weakness before the strike. It is the moment of revelation that makes the blow irreversible. Your enemy cannot defend against what they cannot see. Your silence is suspense. Your calm is camouflage. And when the time comes to act, do so with total force, without warning, without hesitation. But even the strongest need not fight every battle to win. Sometimes, stepping back is not surrender. It's strategy. The next lesson teaches when and how to retreat with purpose. Sometimes the wisest move is to step back, not out of fear, but out of calculation. Strategic withdrawal is the art of conserving strength, buying time, and repositioning for a better fight. In war, the battlefield is not fixed. Circumstances shift, terrain changes, alliances evolve. To cling stubbornly to a position out of pride is to invite destruction. The greatest leaders know when to let go, not to lose, but to return stronger. Machiavelli understood the necessity of retreat. In The Art of War, he wrote, "When you cannot avoid war, you must be prepared to use all your strength. But if war is not favorable to you, it is better to wait than to lose all at once." Retreat, in his philosophy, was never cowardice. It was vision. It was choosing timing over impulse. By withdrawing, you preserve your forces, frustrate your enemies, and sometimes even lure them into overextension. A master of this strategy was George Washington. During the American Revolutionary War, he famously avoided major engagements he couldn't win, retreating again and again to preserve his outnumbered troops. His critics called it weakness, but his withdrawals kept the army alive. Then, when conditions turned in his favor, he struck, crossing the Delaware River and defeating the Hessians at Trenton in a surprise attack that shifted the momentum of the war. Robert Greene's Law 16, use absence to increase respect and honor, echoes this principle. A timely retreat can create mystery, respect, even fear. Absence, like withdrawal, is power in negative space. Retreat is not surrender. It is the pause before the next move, the reshaping of terrain, the clearing of the fog. But to return stronger, you must also return unpredictably. Familiarity is the enemy of fear. If they know your rhythm, they can anticipate your strike. The next strategy breaks that rhythm with deliberate unpredictability. Predictability is a prison, and those who live within it become easy prey. The ordinary, extraordinary strategy is the art of balance, walking the line between the familiar and the surprising. By acting in ways people expect, you lull them into complacency. Then, by shifting suddenly into the extraordinary, you shatter their assumptions and seize the initiative. It's not about being erratic. It's about crafting unpredictability as a weapon. Machiavelli warned against routine. In The Prince, he observed, "It is necessary for a prince to learn how to be other than good." He wasn't advocating evil for its own sake. He meant that leaders must be willing to break their patterns, discard moral expectations, and do the unexpected when the situation demands it. A ruler who always acts in the same way becomes a target. One who shifts methods remains untouchable. A historical example of this strategy is Hannibal Barca, the Carthaginian general who invaded Rome by crossing the Alps, an act considered impossible. His brilliance lay not only in the maneuver itself, but in its psychological impact. The Romans expected traditional battle plans. Hannibal delivered shock. Then, in battle after battle, he alternated between direct assaults and deceptive feints, never letting the enemy settle into a rhythm. Robert Greene captures this in Law 17a. keep others in suspended terror, cultivate an air of unpredictability. Surprise is more than confusion. It's power magnified. It freezes decision-making, triggers fear, and erodes confidence. The key is modulation. Too much unpredictability and you lose trust. Too little and you lose advantage. Move predictably just long enough to bore your enemy, then explode into the extraordinary. Make them guess, hesitate, and misjudge. And when their structure begins to crack, you insert your own influence. Quietly, internally, like a fracture spreading under the surface. That's when you use their own power against them. The next strategy shows you how. Power weakens when divided from within. The counterbalance strategy, when applied externally, is about disrupting your enemy not through direct confrontation, but by encouraging alternative power structures within their ranks. It is the art of fostering internal rivals, empowering factions, and subtly fueling opposition that destabilizes the center. Instead of striking the king, you create another king, and let them fight each other while you grow stronger in the background. Machiavelli saw this tactic as both risky and brilliant. In the Discourses, he praised the Roman Republic's practice of empowering tribunes to check the power of patricians, not because they desired equality, but because they understood that competition within a group could prevent unified resistance. Likewise, he warned rulers to be cautious of overly consolidated enemies, because they are hardest to break. A divided house, however, barely needs a push to fall. A modern example is British colonial rule in Africa and Asia, where local elites, tribal leaders, and minority groups were often empowered to serve colonial administration. The strategy wasn't generosity. It was fracture. By promoting internal rivalries, the British ensured that opposition to their rule would be divided, disorganized, and self-canceling. One center of power balanced another, and neither had the strength to challenge the empire. This strategy aligns with Robert Greene's Law 2A. Never put too much trust in friends, learn how to use enemies, and Law 33. Discover each man's thumbscrew. By understanding tensions within your enemy's world, you learn where to insert influence and where to twist. You don't destroy the structure, you unbalance it. You don't attack the tyrant, you nurture his challenger. In time, both will turn to you for support, unaware that you've become the true center of control. And yet, there are times when even internal division is too slow. Some wars demand no battle, no confrontation, no enemy to weaken, only time. Time itself becomes the weapon. The next strategy wields it like a blade. Speed can kill, but so can stillness. The Fabian strategy is a slow, silent form of warfare that drains the enemy not through force, but through frustration. You avoid direct conflict, refuse to engage on their terms, and allow time to do the damage. Your opponent burns resources, morale, and momentum trying to provoke a fight that never comes. You become a ghost, always present, never reachable. Machiavelli understood the power of patience. In The Prince, he writes, "Fortune changes, and men remain obstinate in their ways." The wise prince, then, must not chase fortune at every turn, but know when to pause, wait, and let others collapse from their own urgency. In warfare, waiting is not weakness, it's composure. It's the ability to let enemies overextend, to mistake your inaction for fear, and to walk into traps they've built for themselves. The strategy takes its name from Quintus Fabius Maximus, the Roman general who faced Hannibal during the Second Punic War. Realizing he couldn't beat Hannibal in open battle, Fabius adopted a strategy of evasion. He shadowed Hannibal's forces, cutting off supplies, raiding camps, and denying engagement. While criticized as cowardly, his approach wore Hannibal down. Rome, preserved by patience, would later defeat its greatest enemy. Robert Greene's Law 21T. Play a sucker to catch a sucker, seem dumber than your mark. And Law 23T. Concentrate your forces. Both echo this approach. You withhold. You watch, and when the time is right, you gather everything for a focused strike. But until then, you wait. The Fabian strategy is a test of ego. Can you resist the need to prove yourself? Can you let your enemy move while you stand still, knowing every step they take brings them closer to collapse? But patience must know its limits. Wait too long, and opportunity fades. The next strategy reveals the importance of knowing when to end the war before it ends you. Victory intoxicates. The rush of conquest, the applause of success, and the illusion of invincibility often lure leaders into a fatal error. Pushing too far. The end, the battle strategy, teaches the discipline of knowing when to stop. It is about recognizing the moment when further action no longer serves your long-term purpose. When the battle is won, and continued fighting only exposes you to new risks. Machiavelli warned against unchecked ambition. In The Prince, he noted, "Men rise from one ambition to another. First, they seek to escape disgrace, then they aim at wealth, then at power, and then at more power still. But the same path that leads upward can spiral into ruin if one does not know when to step off." Machiavelli admired those who could rein in their appetite for war and consolidate what they had taken. Napoleon Bonaparte's campaign in Russia is the clearest historical warning. After countless victories across Europe, Napoleon believed himself unstoppable. But instead of securing his empire, he overreached into Russia, pushing deeper into hostile terrain. The invasion ended in disaster. Not from a stronger enemy, but from snow, starvation, and strategic blindness. He didn't lose because he was weak. He lost because he didn't know when to stop. Robert Greene's Law 470G. Do not go past the mark you aimed for. In victory, learn when to stop. Encapsulates this wisdom. Power, like fire, must be contained. Once it spreads beyond your control, it consumes you along with your enemies. Ending the battle doesn't mean surrender. It means sealing your success. Withdraw when your objective is achieved. Let your enemies flail in your absence. Let your silence become the echo of your triumph. And yet, some victories must go beyond the surface. Some wars are fought not on land, but in the hearts of empires, in the unseen centers of gravity. The next strategy teaches how to strike at what holds everything together. Every power structure, no matter how vast, how intimidating, relies on a core. This center of gravity might be a person, an idea, a belief, a resource, or a system. When you strike that core, the entire structure trembles. The center of gravity strategy is about precision over force. Rather than attacking everything, You identify what holds your enemy together and direct all your energy toward breaking it. Machiavelli understood that the destruction of a rival does not require endless skirmishes. In The Prince, he wrote, "A single blow is enough to remove the head, the limbs fall on their own." For him, the essence of strategic war was focus. Finding the pressure point that, once struck, makes resistance futile. It is not about overwhelming the enemy everywhere. It is about collapsing them from within by destabilizing what they cannot afford to lose. One of the most striking historical examples comes from the US military doctrine during the Gulf War. Rather than engage Iraqi forces across the entire region, coalition strategists identified Saddam Hussein's command and control infrastructure, communications, air defenses, and oil supply routes as the regime's center of gravity. In a matter of days, those targets were systematically neutralized, rendering the larger army blind and disoriented. The war was won not by sheer numbers, but by surgical strikes at the enemy's core. This aligns with Robert Greene's Law 33G. Discover each man's thumbscrew. Every empire, organization, or person has a vulnerability, a pillar that, if removed, causes collapse. You must study deeply, observe quietly, and strike only when your aim is certain. Fools spread their power thin. Masters concentrate it. When you strike the center, the rest follows like a shadow. But sometimes, you don't just want your enemy to fall. You want them erased. The next strategy doesn't weaken. It annihilates. There are moments when partial victory is the most dangerous outcome. To wound an enemy without destroying them is to guarantee future retaliation. The annihilation strategy demands total dominance. Elimination so absolute that recovery is impossible. It is brutal, final, and often controversial. But when executed with precision, it prevents decades of conflict and solidifies your reign through fear, not resistance. Machiavelli was explicit on this point. In The Prince, he writes, "Injuries must be inflicted all at once, so that their taste being less, they offend less." But more importantly, he warned, one should never strike a prince to wound him, but to kill him. Half measures leave the door open for revenge, and mercy, when poorly timed, is weakness in disguise. If you allow your enemies to survive in any meaningful way, they will bide their time, rebuild, and strike when you are vulnerable. History gives us the ruthless efficiency of Qin Shi Huang, the first emperor of a unified China. When he conquered rival states, he didn't negotiate or leave their ruling families in place. He erased them. He destroyed their text, centralized power, and executed dissenters. His legacy, though marked by tyranny, was centuries of stability. The price was annihilation, but the result was permanence. This strategy echoes Robert Greene's Law 115G, crush your enemy totally. A clean break leaves no ghosts. The more final your action, the less you must defend your victory later. Annihilation must be rare, but when chosen, it must be complete. No lingering threats, no forgotten hairs, no ideological survivors. If done well, your enemy's name becomes a warning, not a rallying cry. But what if you can't overpower your enemy directly? What if their strength is too great? Then you turn it inward. The next strategy reveals how to let their own force destroy them. The stronger your enemy, the more vulnerable they become to their own weight. Power breeds pride, pride blinds, and blindness leads to collapse. The double-edged strategy is about redirecting your opponent's greatest asset, be it their reputation, resources, or overconfidence, so it becomes their downfall. You don't resist their strength, you guide it off a cliff. Machiavelli understood the fatal irony of power. In The Prince, he observed, "Men rise on fortunes, while they are destroyed by the very same traits that once made them great." A prince must study the strengths of others, not to fear them, but to find the cracks hidden within. Often, those who appear invincible are simply overextended, unaware that their might has become a weapon against themselves. History offers a potent example in the Vietnam War. The United States entered with overwhelming military superiority, firepower, technology, manpower. But the North Vietnamese and Viet Cong turned that strength into a liability. They drew American forces into unfamiliar terrain, used guerrilla tactics, and leveraged global opinion against the US. The more aggressively America fought, the more it seemed like the oppressor. Its very power weakened its legitimacy. This aligns with Robert Greene's Law 311. Control the options, get others to play with the cards you deal. And Law 390, stir up waters to catch fish. You provoke, confuse, and guide the opponent toward using their best weapons in the worst way. When your enemy is proud of something, question it. When they rely on something, overburden it. When they flaunt their strength, show them its shadow. Let them hoist themselves with their own ambition. And if a frontal attack fails, this strategy opens a side door. Sometimes the best way to win is not to confront, but to flank. That's where we turn next in the flanking strategy. The art of striking from the margins. Direct attacks are predictable. They prepare your enemy, tighten their defenses, and lock you into their terms. The flanking strategy bypasses the stronghold. It's the art of coming from where you're least expected. Physically, mentally, or strategically. When your opponent is braced for a frontal blow, even a light touch from the side can collapse their entire position. Surprise isn't just a tactic, it's an amplifier of force. Machiavelli praised such indirect methods. In The Art of War, he emphasized deception and maneuver over brute engagement. The wise captain never engages in battle unless he is compelled or sees great advantage, he wrote. When strength meets strength, the outcome is uncertain. But when strategy meets complacency, victory becomes a matter of timing. The flanking move embodies that principle. Let the enemy expect one thing, then deliver something entirely different. One of the most brilliant examples is General Stonewall Jackson's Shenandoah Valley campaign during the American Civil War. Outnumbered and outgunned, Jackson moved swiftly through the valley, using mountain passes and misdirection to appear where he shouldn't. He disrupted Union plans, tied down massive forces, and achieved psychological dominance. Not by fighting head-on, but by being everywhere and nowhere at once. This ties into Robert Greene's Law 6, court attention at all costs, and Law 20 OG, do not commit to anyone. A flanking strategy draws attention in one place, while your real power moves elsewhere. It avoids entanglement. preserves flexibility, and reshapes the battlefield to your advantage. To flank is to rewrite the script. You don't play the role they expect. You appear from the wings, change the lighting, and own the stage. And once your enemy is spinning from disorientation, you can exploit their confusion even further by hiding your true intentions under the most deceptive mask. The next strategy sharpens this deception to a deadly pointing the false flag attack. The most devastating attacks are the ones no one sees coming. Not because they're invisible, but because they're disguised. The false flag strategy is about creating the illusion of alignment, weakness, or innocence to mask your true intentions. You appear to be what you are not. An ally, a victim, a neutral party, until the moment of revelation. By the time your enemy understands, it's already too late. Machiavelli revealed in The Value of Deception. In The Prince, he wrote, "A prince must be a great pretender and dissembler. Appear virtuous," he argued, "while doing whatever is necessary to maintain power. Reputation and reality must be decoupled. A well-executed false flag, whether diplomatic, military, or psychological, allows a ruler to strike with clean hands and unanticipated force." A masterclass in this strategy comes from Operation Grief during World War II. German soldiers under Otto Skorzeny infiltrated American lines during the Battle of the Bulge by wearing US uniforms and using captured equipment. Though the operation had limited tactical success, its psychological impact was immense. The fear of betrayal spread rapidly, slowing American response and sowing distrust among their own troops. This aligns with Robert Greene's Law 3G, conceal your intentions, and Law 32, a play to people's fantasies. False flag tactics don't just deceive the enemy. They exploit their hopes, fears, and assumptions. You feed them a narrative they want to believe, while preparing the truth they'll never see coming. Deception is more than a lie. It's a strategy of control. You direct attention where it cannot harm you, while your real strike takes shape in the shadows. And once that strike succeeds, the momentum is yours. One move unfolds into many, cascading into an avalanche of victories. That's the essence of the chain reaction strategy, now turned from defense to offense. In war, as in life, the first victory is only the beginning. True power lies in transforming that win into momentum, a self-sustaining wave that carries you forward, compounding advantages until resistance is impossible. The offensive chain reaction strategy is about making each triumph not a conclusion, but a catalyst. You don't just win, you create a sequence of wins, each flowing naturally from the last. Machiavelli understood the kinetic nature of power. In The Prince, he stated, "Success produces success." He admired how some rulers used initial victories not to rest, but to press further, seizing the moment when their enemies were stunned and the political terrain was shifting in their favor. In his view, hesitation after success was more dangerous than failure, because it wastes the rarest advantage, momentum. A brilliant example is Genghis Khan. After defeating one tribe or rival, he immediately leveraged that victory, absorbing prisoners into his forces, intimidating other tribes into submission, and using the fear he generated to open new doors. His campaigns weren't isolated events, They were engineered sequences. Each win was fuel for the next. His empire didn't just grow, it detonated across continents. This mirrors Robert Greene's Law 3-4. Be royal in your own fashion. Act like a king to be treated like one. Success, when displayed boldly, breeds more success. Combine it with Law 2090. Plan all the way to the end, and you begin to create a domino effect of domination. The secret lies in planning your next move within the current one. Every battle you fight should be connected to the next 3. You must already be halfway into your next victory before your opponent recovers from the last. It becomes less about individual wins and more about inevitability, and yet, the best momentum is often set in motion by illusion. Sometimes, a calculated weakness, an enticing target, can bait your enemy into the exact trap you want. That's the art of the next strategy, the decoy. When your enemy is cautious, you must give them a reason to relax. When they are strong, you must make them feel superior. The decoy strategy is about setting bait so appealing, so convincing, that your opponent moves exactly where you want them to. You draw them in not by force, but by desire, offering them a false victory, an imagined advantage, or a fabricated weakness. Then, when they overextend, you strike. Machiavelli frequently emphasized the manipulation of perception. In The Prince, he explained, one must be a fox in order to recognize traps, and a lion to frighten wolves. The fox lays traps, disguised deceptive and alluring. He knew that a ruler must not always confront head-on, but must often let the enemy reveal themselves by their own ambition. An enduring historical example comes from the Battle of Cannae. Hannibal, facing a much larger Roman force, intentionally weakened the center of his line and allowed the Romans to push forward. They believed they were winning. In truth, they were stepping into a trap. Hannibal's flanks then closed in, surrounding and annihilating them. The bait worked. The illusion of victory seduced them into complete defeat. This ties to Robert Greene's Law 80. Make other people come to you. Use bait if necessary. And Law 30. When asking for help, appeal to people's self-interest. A decoy is not just a distraction. It's a manipulation of expectations. A psychological chess move that lures your opponent into vulnerability. To use this strategy, you must understand what your enemy craves: security, ego, reward, recognition, and construct your bait accordingly. Then step aside and let their desire lead them into collapse. But sometimes, deception and misdirection are not enough. There are wars that cannot be won through convention. In those battles, you must step outside the rules entirely. The next phase of warfare is unorthodox, ruthless, and dark. Welcome to unconventional warfare. Nothing unsettles an enemy more than unpredictability, especially when it masquerades as madness. The Feigned madness strategy uses the illusion of irrationality to disarm, confuse, and mislead. You behave erratically, make decisions that defy logic, and present yourself as chaotic or unstable. Your enemies, unable to read your motives or forecast your moves, begin to hesitate, underestimate, or miscalculate, precisely when you are most in control. Machiavelli revered cunning over convention. In The Prince, he asserted, "The prince must learn to be other than good." which includes appearing other than sane when necessary. He observed how those who seemed irrational often gained the freedom to act without scrutiny, while others tangled themselves in predictable, orderly expectations. To Machiavelli, feigned madness was not foolishness, it was strategy cloaked in disorder. The archetype of this strategy is found in Hamlet, Shakespeare's Prince of Denmark, who pretended to lose his mind in order to investigate, manipulate, and ultimately avenge the murder of his father. But history offers real examples too, like George S. Patton, the American general who encouraged stories of his temper and impulsiveness. His enemies, and sometimes even his allies, found him erratic, unpredictable, and hard to gauge. Yet behind the facade was a calculating military genius. This reflects Robert Greene's Law 21c. Play a sucker to catch a sucker. Seem dumber than your mark. And Law 17. Keep others in suspended terror. Cultivate an air of unpredictability. Madness, real or staged, blurs boundaries and unnerves all who try to play by the rules. The genius of feigned madness is that it allows you to break patterns and cross lines without immediate retaliation. People excuse what they can't explain. And while they scramble to decode your behavior, you prepare your strike. But madness is only one kind of infection. Sometimes, rather than destabilizing with confusion, you spread discontent like a virus, turning your enemy's house into a breeding ground for betrayal. That is the art of the next strategy, the chain of discontent. Power is fragile when it rests on silence and suppressed frustration. The chain of discontent strategy transforms this fragility into a weapon, not by attacking directly, but by inflaming what is already smoldering inside your enemy's camp. You identify grievances, feed resentment, and give voice to the whispers beneath the surface. One complaint becomes two become 10. Soon, your enemy is not fighting you, they are fighting themselves. Machiavelli understood the power of internal unrest. In the Discourses he wrote, "A people that is used to living free will never be content with being enslaved." This discontent doesn't vanish, it festers, and the wise ruler, or cunning enemy, learns to amplify it. Machiavelli admired how Rome strategically offered support to factions within enemy cities, weakening their unity before ever raising a sword. One master of this strategy was Talleyrand, Napoleon's chief diplomat turned betrayer. When he saw the emperor overreaching, Talleyrand began sowing doubt among allies, whispering about Napoleon's ambitions and recklessness. Quietly, he encouraged other ministers, generals, and nobles to question the emperor's vision. By the time Napoleon noticed, it was too late. The walls of loyalty had crumbled from within. This strategy aligns perfectly with Robert Greene's Law 21. Infection. Avoid the unhappy and unlucky, and more importantly, Law 22, strike the shepherd and the sheep will scatter. But here, instead of striking the shepherd, you spread dissent until the flock turns on him themselves. You don't need a loud voice to fracture an empire. A whisper in the right ear, a suggestion at the right time, a rumor in the right circle. These are the silent blades that cut deepest. And yet, when faced with overwhelming power, even whispers may not be enough. There are moments when the wisest move is to bow, to bend, not break. But that bow is strategic, not submission. Sometimes, to win the final war, you must lose a battle by choice. That is the essence of the next strategy, strategic surrender. In war, ego often demands defiance, resistance, and last stands. But ego is not strategy. The strategic surrender strategy teaches that yielding, when done consciously, is not weakness, but foresight. You appear defeated, but in truth, you're conserving strength, earning trust, buying time. You live to fight again, under better terms, and on ground of your choosing. Machiavelli recognized this paradox of power. In The Prince, he stated, "The wise man does at once what the fool does finally." A ruler should know when to withdraw, when to concede, and when to lose in order to win something far greater. Strategic surrender preserves your resources, redirects your opponent's attention, and lowers their guard. You gain more by yielding than by destroying yourself in futile resistance. A perfect example is Saladin, the Muslim leader during the Crusades. After reconquering Jerusalem, he allowed Christian pilgrims to enter the city peacefully, rather than exacting revenge. His restraint stunned the West and earned him admiration even from his enemies. This surrender of retribution gave him moral high ground, preserved stability, and secured long-term dominance. This strategy aligns with Robert Greene's Law 22E. Use the surrender tactic, transform weakness into power. And also with Law 36E. Disdain things you cannot have. Ignoring them is the best revenge. Surrender, in this context, is not an end. It is a redirection. You must be willing to give ground today, to claim the terrain tomorrow. Let your enemy believe they've won. Let them relax. Let them underestimate you. Then, when they've spent their energy, when the tide has turned, you rise. Not as the beaten, but as the returned. And when you rise, you do not return with a single strategy. You come layered, unpredictable, and multidimensional. Because the final principle of warfare is not to rely on one method, but to master them all. The last strategy reveals that true power lies in synthesis. No single strategy wins every war. Enemies evolve, terrains shift, and what worked yesterday may betray you tomorrow. The mix and match strategy is the highest form of mastery. Blending deception with aggression, patience with speed, diplomacy with brutality. You become fluid, adapting your approach moment by moment, weaving together techniques to keep your opponents off balance and under control. Machiavelli didn't believe in dogma. He believed in results. In The Prince, he advised that a ruler must be both lion and fox, strong when necessary, cunning when it counts. One who deceives will always find those who allow themselves to be deceived. He wrote, yet also stressed that arms alone are not enough to maintain power. The message's strategies must serve context, not ideology. History remembers Alexander the Great as a military prodigy. But it was his ability to adapt that truly made him unstoppable. Against Persia, he used Blitzkrieg like shock tactics. In India, he shifted to siege warfare and diplomacy. He mixed alliances with annihilation, fear with favor, and loyalty with ruthless discipline. No single method defined him. His brilliance was in knowing which to use, and when. Robert Greene's Law 48, assume formlessness, is the embodiment of this strategy. Rigidity leads to defeat. The strategist who flows, who surprises, who blends tactics, becomes untouchable. You are not trapped in any single method, because you master them all. You don't follow a script, you write one as you go. Power lies not in knowing a way, but in knowing every way, and choosing with precision. Like a painter with a vast palette, you layer tones and textures until your masterpiece is unassailable. Every strategy, feigned madness, counterattack, blitzkrieg, retreat, becomes a tool, not a religion. And when your enemies still cling to one rule book, you'll be pages ahead, writing new ones, rewriting the old, or throwing them out entirely. That is how war becomes art. That is how victory becomes inevitable. You've now seen the 33 strategies of war, not just as pages in a book, but as weapons forged in history, sharpened by Machiavelli, and still wielded in silence today. These strategies weren't created for chaos. They were born from the need to survive, to lead, and to win when the odds were impossible. Some demand boldness, others require patience, but together they form something greater. A blueprint for strategic thinking in a world that rewards the ruthless and forgets the predictable. The question now is not whether you understand them. It's whether you will recognize them. In your boardroom, in your politics, in your relationships, in yourself. Because war is not always declared. Sometimes it whispers, sometimes it smiles. But those who study its strategies don't just survive, they rule.